All right, so I think we stopped seeing a flood of new arrivals in the room. I'm sure there will still be some people who are joining throughout, but good morning to everybody who's in the United States and good evening to the many attendees who are joining us today from Asia. I'm very happy to welcome all of you to this webinar on GIS tools for smarter energy planning. My name is Courtney Weatherby. I'm a research analyst at the Stimson Center, and I will be serving as the moderator for today's discussion. As many of you who are attending know, this is a side event for the Asia Clean Energy Forum, or ACEF, which is held annually in June in Manila, and which gathers stakeholders from around the world to explore groundbreaking research and share knowledge on the clean energy transition. Like so many other conferences, this year's ACEF is being held virtually given the coronavirus situation, which is something that allows us at the Stimson Center, Global Energy Monitor and National Renewable Energy Laboratory to all still participate remotely for this side event. So we're very happy to welcome all of you to today's discussion. For those of you who are not familiar with the Stimson Center, we are a Washington, D.C. based think tank that's dedicated to enhancing global peace and economic prosperity by identifying pragmatic solutions to current and emerging global challenges. Our research agenda includes a very broad range of critical security and development challenges, but it's generally organized across 4 key themes: protecting people, preserving the planet, promoting security and prosperity, and grand strategy in pivotal places. Stimson's Southeast Asia program, of which I and my colleague Reagan Kwan, who will be speaking today, are both a part, has been working for nearly 15 years to support sustainable development in the Mekong region of Southeast Asia, particularly focusing on the water, energy, food nexus and on system scale planning approaches. So just looking broadly at the topic for today's discussion, we're really focused on multi-sector approaches to energy planning and energy development. As many of us know, the transition towards a truly sustainable energy future is really dependent on the adoption not only of all of the new technologies and efficiencies that are coming out, but also on considering the intersections between energy and many other sectors: industry, agriculture, water, and certainly not last or least, climate. Most environmental and natural resource management challenges that our world faces today are under pressure from a variety of different sectors. And so addressing these complex challenges really does benefit from an integrated approach that supports consideration of projects or portfolio impacts and trade-offs across multiple sectors, across a system scale rather than an individual project scale, and across multiple considerations and indicators. We're going to be focusing today specifically on the role that GIS, geographic information system technology, can play in supporting multi-sector planning approaches for infrastructure development. So those of you who are familiar with GIS know that it is essentially a way to map and analyze information of any type against other existing information. So what we're looking at today on a map. So what we're looking at today is really the opportunity to map and analyze energy infrastructure and energy trends against other existing data sets, such as planned infrastructure from other sectors, key environmental indicators, socioeconomic data, and other information that is valuable to decision makers, particularly information that may not necessarily be familiar or easily accessible to energy experts. A lot of GIS tools now are publicly available and can provide non-technical audience or non-sectorally specific expert audience with information that's very relevant to them on individual projects or on large data sets. So for today, we're probably going to focus on the opportunity to frame individual projects within a broader energy development context to identify risks from the environment or to the environment from individual projects or from a system, a portfolio of energy infrastructure projects, as well as to explore gaps in the current approach in where we're seeing electricity development or energy production and where there are maybe opportunities for more sustainable alternative pathways. So the 3 tools that we're presenting today are all including high quality and extensive data on power generation projects, power generation opportunities, as well as other environmental, socioeconomic, and other layers and criteria, ranging from air pollution and carbon emissions to socioeconomic and environmental indicators. So each of our 3 presenters are going to briefly introduce the GIS-based tool that their organization has worked on and developed and is made available to the public. And then we're going to have a discussion on how these can visualize, clarify, and support considerations of intersections between energy and other sectors. So while all of these tools and approaches have a slightly different focus area, ultimately they all make data more accessible and usable to non-experts to help deliver a more sustainable energy future. So joining us today to explore these tools in the order of their presentations are Reagan Kwan from the Stimson Center, Nathan Lee from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and James Browning from Global Energy Monitor. I'm going to briefly give their bios as an introduction now, and then we'll turn it over to them for a presentation. So Reagan Kwan is my colleague. He's a research associate with our Southeast Asia program here at the Stimson Center. His work focuses on environmental and socioeconomic impacts of development in the greater Mekong subregion. Reagan manages the technical aspects and the data for our Mekong infrastructure project, which he's presenting today. He holds a master's in public policy from the University of California, San Diego, and a bachelor's degree from the University of California in Los Angeles. Nathan Lee is a researcher with the US Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory, where he focuses on decision support and energy system planning. Nathan has an extensive international research portfolio that centers around supporting energy strategy development in emerging economies, and he has done work in Laos and the Philippines. Nathan's doctoral research focused on decision support methodologies for national energy planning in developing economies. Nathan will be presenting on National Renewable Energy Laboratory's Renewable Energy Data Explorer. And James Browning is the Communications Director for Global Energy Monitor. He has worked to hold the fossil fuel industry accountable as a writer, researcher, and game designer. Prior to joining Global Energy Monitor, James worked for 10 years as a state and regional director for Common Cause and wrote Deep Drilling, Deep Pockets, a series of reports about the fracking industry. James will be presenting on the range of tools that Global Energy Monitor presents, including GEM-Wiki, the Global Coal Plant Tracker, and the Global Fossil Infrastructure Tracker. So before we begin the presentations, I just want to give a few brief logistical notes to all of our attendees today. At any point during the session, if you have a question, please click on the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and it will pop up and you'll have the opportunity to type your question in there. I will be monitoring the chat box and we'll be pulling questions for the question and answer session once our presentations have finished. We do anticipate, given that there are more than 70 people on the call already, that there might be a few more questions than we're able to get to in today's session, but I will do my best to ask a representative suite of questions. I may combine a few questions when they're very similar, but any questions that people are not able to ask personally today on the call, we're more than happy to follow up with. And on that note, at the end of the session, I will be doing a poll asking if you're interested in following up with any of us on any of the tools that we're presenting. So if you click yes on any of those, then your contact information will be shared with the panelists so that they can follow up with you on their individual tool. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleagues for their presentations. So we're going to go ahead and start with Reagan to talk about the Mekong Infrastructure Tracker.
Thank you, Courtney. Good morning and good evening to everyone who's attending. My name is Reagan, as Courtney mentioned before, and I'll be presenting on our Mekong Infrastructure Tracker. It's an online ecosystem. It's ongoing of interactive tools to kind of understand, provide a comprehensive state of infrastructure development and emerging trends in the lower Mekong countries, as well as projects in China with transboundary implications. So this here is our launching page at Stimson, and it's freely available and anyone can access it at the moment. Here you can have access to both the tools that I'll be discussing very briefly, as well as information about our data and resources available to help users who are interested in learning how to use both the tools and other information as we continue to build up this project. So I'll first briefly discuss the dashboard itself. So the dashboard provides the comprehensive data set of infrastructure projects in the region. Both at this moment, we have power generating infrastructure and linear infrastructure as well. And as I mentioned, it's ongoing. So we intend to build this up to include industrial zones like special economic zones, train stations, ports, in the near future, as well as reservoirs and hopefully transmission lines, given certain limitations. So the main purpose of this tool is for users to sort and filter through all of these projects based on certain variables that we've collected. In this case, it's mainly geographic and political. To filter, you can use the filter panel on the left-hand side. You can search through several projects by specific names if you know them by on hand. Project types, this is the power generating source, including coal, gas, geothermal, waste, solar, etc. You can also search through project status, whether it's operational or under construction or planned. We have many other variables, and we can also go into the more geopolitical aspect where we can find out who are the foreign investors or stakeholders that are interested or part of certain projects as they continue to develop, as well as these geographical and I guess environmental variables that we can filter through. So for example, we may be interested in Chinese sponsored projects, and then the map will filter, leaving you with what's left based on this filter. And then you can continue to build up on this. So if we wanted to do the same with also Chinese construction companies involved, it'll narrow it down further for us. And then once you're finished with this filter, you can always reset it and you can start back from the beginning. We also provide charts for users to provide another visual aspect of what the data is showing at the moment. These charts are representative of what projects are on the map at the moment. So as you can tell, there are about a third of all the projects are in the plan phase. About 45% are operational, and we have several other types of graphs that are preset and made for you. These graphs, you can print them out for your own use if you'd like, and they do come in, I think, a PNG file. But one of the cooler aspects about these graphs is that they also act as a filter. So if I wanted to look at planned projects on the map, I can click on this subset of the graph and it will filter the map down for us also. And this chart filter and the filter before are interactive to a certain extent, but you can always go back and forth if you wanted to use one or the other. And with the same kind of functions as the chart, you can always reset the chart. As the filters, you can reset the charts and the map will reset itself. And to provide a little more context as to, we do want to see, when we do want users to have this kind of robust capability to view certain intersections of different data layers, we do provide for this tool several background layers. These really do only act as a visual representation. If you want to analyze the intersection of these data points with socioeconomic or environmental layers, that's when we will go into the project impact screener, which I'll discuss following. And finally, on the right-hand side, we have our project detail page. This is the comprehensive list of all the projects that we've all the information of the projects we've collected over a period of about a year or so. And they do filter and update based on what your updates are on the map itself. So if I wanted to filter out to only hydroelectric power plants, the list on the right updates itself. And we can even click on certain icons and it'll zoom in for us, and then it will also drop down an information bucket. So if I click on this project right here, the Namtoon 2 Dam, we zoomed in, we can see where it is geographically. And then we also have all this information pertaining to this specific project that we've collected over time. Let's go back there. And as you can tell, this is one project that we've collected most information on, and is really reflective of what you see on the filter, but also includes specific companies that we found information on. And then you do, however, see that sometimes there are information or variables that we are missing. And this is really one area of our ongoing project that we really want to emphasize is that we are still collecting information, but we are also very interested in finding collaborators in the region locally who can help us collect this information. So in order to do that, users can always submit data. Up here on the top of the tracker itself, you have a general submission where it takes you to a survey. You can input whatever information you have and then give us the new information. Or if we're missing information, you can also provide that. However, if you know the specific project and you know some of this information here is either incomplete or is incorrect, you can also submit data that is specific to this particular project. And that will get back to me in particular. And if you allow it, we can contact you and we'll talk through the process of how we collect all this information. But if you also want to know that on your own, we also provide that overview methodology page on the top here too. We also provide all the information we have. In the name of data transparency and accuracy, we do want to provide our users with all this information so that they themselves can follow where we went in terms of gathering all this information. And finally, for those who want to take this information outside of the tracker itself, we have the download where you can download all of this information that is currently filtered on the map into an Excel file, and you can use this on your own according to whatever software you want to use externally. So that's a quick overview of what the dashboard itself does. If we go over to the project impact screener, this tool also uses the same underlying infrastructure projects that we have, the layers that we have, but it combines all of them together. And it also provides the ability for users to analyze and screen through the certain socioeconomic environmental impacts that we've mentioned several times before. So in this case, we see all the project energy generating project points, but we also see the infrastructure, the linear infrastructure that we saw briefly earlier. In this case, it's very similar that you can filter through the layers that we have by turning them on. Very similar capabilities with what kind of variables we have. If you're very familiar with this kind of software, you can also create your own custom filters based on whichever layers we have available. You can also search for locations in the region. So an example, I want Vientiane. I can look that up. It'll take us directly to that area. And now we can see what the development, infrastructure development in the area looks like. In order to use the tool itself, we also have to turn on the layers. As I mentioned before, in the other tool, the layers are only aesthetically there. But for this tool, most of the layers are available for use. So we can always turn on the rivers layer, as you see there. We have threatened species, and we have ethnic groups. There's some of the ones that we've been able to collect publicly. But one thing with the current underlying ArcGIS online web service is that they don't provide raster analysis. For those who are familiar with raster analysis, it's a pixel by pixel layer rather than these geographical or poly figures that are like more lines or points or polygons. However, our team just recently purchased access to, I guess, ArcGIS Enterprise, which is a more encompassing suite of programs from ArcGIS that allows raster analysis. So once we've incorporated that feature into these tools, we can also begin analyzing our raster layers, like, for example, forest loss from the Global Forest Watch, or population density from World Pop, and sea level rise, in this case from Coastal DEM, but also SRTM. So how do we use this tool? On the left-hand side, we have this area of interest tool. This is the main screening tool for this, for the project impact screener. We can go back to Vientiane right here. And let's say I'm an urban developer working in the capital Laos, and I want to know what the current outlook is in terms of infrastructure development in Vientiane. I can drop a point, I can draw a line, I can draw a rectangle, any type of polygons, and I can also put in a shapefile for those who have their own regions of interest and they have it in a shapefile format. You can upload this onto the tool, and then it'll upload it and input it into the map itself. And then I can also have specific coordinates if I know them by hand. In this case, since I know I want this area, I'll just drop the pin on Vientiane. And because I'm interested in the regional outlook of what development's going on, I'll draw a 50-mile buffer. And you'll see that red circle right there dictates what's going to be screened through the tool. And then I'm going to turn on the layers that I'm interested in. So I want to know what the environmental impact is of, or current environmental assessment of the region relative to the infrastructure development. So I'll turn on protected areas, threatened species, and let's say key biodiversity areas. Once I have all these layers turned on, I run a report, and this will generate a report based on each layer that I've turned on, and it will create it layer by layer. And you'll know it's finished when these little loading icons are finished. And what this creates is a comprehensive list of every intersection within this circle. And it can take a little bit more time depending on which layers you turn on. But if you have specific ones that you're focused on, you can do it one at a time. And once it's finished, you'll get this drop-down list of all the layers that are finished. If, for example, if I was interested in key biodiversity areas, I can open this up and I can look and see what kind of information we have within this region on key biodiversity areas. The same goes for protected areas and threatened species. Once that's finished, the same capabilities are available as the dashboard as in Project Impact Screener. You can download all of these layers individually as CSV files that you can also export into a data analysis or data management software like R, or into Python or Stata as you'd like. And you can continue on your analysis through there. When you're finished, you can either print, you can also print out this entire list if you'd like, and you can always just reset this and redo the screening itself. So that was a brief introduction as to both of the tools that are currently available. We are continuing to build this up, and we do want to interact more with our user community as we continue to develop the project. So I look forward to the discussion later into the event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reagan. And just one thing I don't recall if you specified at the beginning, but can you talk very briefly about how this tool came into existence?
Sorry, the ambulance just came by. What was the question?
I was just going to ask if you could give a very brief background on how the tool came into existence or how it's supported.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so this is a USAID project under the Mekong Safeguards Project that's really looking into providing safeguard measures and best practices in ESG. And in our case, we are really focused in infrastructure development and how those developments have implications towards better governance and environmental safeguards in terms of making sure we provide stakeholders locally with the information they need to make better policy decision processes.
Great, thanks. And for anyone who's interested in more information about the partnerships, this project is implemented by the Asia Foundation and the Simpson Center, and you can see information about that on the partners page for the tool. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and have us turn over to Nathan Lee to talk about the Renewable Energy Data Explorer.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. Hello, everyone, and thank you to the ASEF organizers for this great virtual conference, as well as the Stimson Center for organizing this really important side event, and all the other presenters today, Regan and James, and all of you participants for joining this evening, your time or morning, depending on where you are in the world for this virtual conference. I'm Nathan Lee, as Courtney noted, a researcher with the US Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory, based here in the United States. I'm really grateful for the opportunity today to present on RE, or Renewable Energy Explorer, as a GIS tool that can support data-driven decision-making and planning, which I think fits nicely into this suite of tools that we're discussing today. Before I jump into the tool, I wanted to quickly introduce NREL's partnership with USAID, or the US Agency for International Development, which really informs and guides and funds our work on great platforms such as the one I'm presenting today. The USAID NREL partnerships, global technical platforms provide free state-of-the-art support on common and critical challenges to scaling up advanced energy systems. And these tools help to support policy, planning, and deployment support, as well as providing a number of global technical toolkits or platforms online that are free for use. Today, I'm presenting on RE Explorer, which I invite you all to visit after my presentation, but also listed here are some of the other platforms we work on, such as Greening the Grid, that focuses on grid integration, iJedi, that focuses on some of the economic analyses behind RE development, and the Resilient Energy Platform that helps policymakers work towards building resilient energy systems in their countries or regions. So a quick introduction to RE Data Explorer. The RE Explorer platform provides free renewable energy resource data, analytical tools, and technical assistance to developers, policymakers, and other decision makers in developing economies. It's a user-friendly geospatial analysis tool for analyzing renewable energy potential and informing many different types of decisions, which I'll go through shortly. The tool allows for visualization, analysis, and download of renewable energy potential and complementary data sets to support decision making. And users using the tool have access to a number of renewable energy data and complementary data, as I noted, to guide development of energy resource development and planning. I'll switch over for a quick walkthrough of the tool as an introduction. I invite you all to kind of save the link here that you see, reexplorer.org, and follow it and explore it later more on your own, but I'll give a quick introduction and walkthrough. Great. So on your screen, you should see our landing page for the RE Explorer platform. And this platform really grew out of a need that we saw that and it was expressed to us by partners around the world that making data-driven decisions to support energy planning can present a lot of challenges. And these challenges may be familiar to many of you, depending on what hat you wear or what your role is in RE or other infrastructure development. First, it involves understanding the limits and opportunities offered by renewable energy technologies, such as wind, solar, and biomass, as well as the opportunities and constraints presented by infrastructure systems to support these technologies. As an example, for the region, electric vehicles are beginning to become of more interest and being deployed around the region to reduce emissions or improve energy security or provide a demand for domestic power. But all of this would require infrastructure such that electric vehicles can be plugged into the grid when they're parked anywhere and charge their batteries or serve as storage devices to provide services to the grid. It also involves understanding where renewable energy resources may be in your country, where they're available, and how those resources might be integrated into larger systems to generate electricity or heat, and also provide for distribution or utility scale systems. Finally, it also involves understanding the end user. Where are loads actually represented in your region? What are the patterns of energy consumption? And what sort of devices for the services do people actually need? So RE Data Explorer and geospatial analysis more broadly, such as the tools that you're seeing this morning or this evening, can help you explore or users explore different aspects of these systems or this system problem to help inform clean energy planning and national, at the national, regional, or even global level. So when you come to RE Data Explorer's site, you'll see a lot of tools that are meant to help address these challenges that I just discussed. So on our landing page, most visibly, you'll see a map with colors for the countries that are currently represented with data in RE Data Explorer. We also across the top offer a number of other resources. You can learn more about the tool. You can learn about where we work globally with USAID, data-driven decisions, so resources to help you with data-driven decision-making for energy policy planning, investment, and for other decision types around renewable energies. We also have a number of resources and training, which provide a number of tools for analysis of RE resources, as well as trainings, videos on how to use RE Data Explorer for different purposes, such as understanding the cost of energy or understanding technical potential, or how to download and just use the tool. We also have an Ask an Expert service for specific assistance, or a data catalog if you have questions about what data exists, or if you'd like to submit or share some data for your local region. And at the bottom, you can see some highlighted or recent publications. Specifically at the top here, we'll see RE for auctions and using RE Data Explorer, as well as RE Data Explorer to help project development for private developers looking to scale up resources in the region. On the map, we can click, and I'll click today on Southeast Asia as an example. And when I click that, I will jump to RE Data Explorer Southeast Asia, where we'll see a quick survey. We invite you all to fill out our survey so we can learn more about what you need as a decision maker on how we can improve the tool. As we come to the country, we have some preset data layers opening up. This is actually solar PV electricity generation potential here on our map. So a map that looks much like Google Maps or other online mapping resources. So it's very easy to use if you're familiar with these tools. If you're not familiar with these sorts of tools, up here at the top right, we have tutorials, and you can take a quick tutorial on GIS functionality of our tool, which I invite you all to do. But you can change the base layer on our map. You can zoom in and out. You can also find a specific location, such as VNTN, keeping with our tradition this evening, and we can zoom into VNTN. And we can quickly just zoom back out by scrolling. On the left-hand side, you'll see our layer tree, which currently is organized by regional data as well as country-level data. At the regional level, we've been working with the ASEAN Center for Energy to collect a number of different regional data sets, as well as some technical potential scenarios, which I'll talk through later, and some hazards to help with resilient energy systems planning. At the country level, what we have is a set of categories for data that includes environmental data, grid or system data, administrative data, and then wind and solar, and sometimes geothermal, biomass, or hydropower data, depending on the data sets collected. Typically, we try to share the best in class available highest quality data from global data sets. And where we have demand and we're working with in-country partners, we try to share as much local data as possible to support analysis in that country. But it's mostly demand-driven data accessibility. If we scroll down, we can look at a specific country such as Lao PDR, and we can see that under environmental, we have elevation-based data, land use data, as well as protected area data. If I turn off all of these layers quickly and come back to Lao PDR and would like to learn more about different types of land use, protected area locations, or global solar resource data, I can toggle those layers on. I can find out more by hitting the little question mark and open up metadata to find out more and the source of that data. We can also download much of this data for protected areas or land use. There's a download button, and you can download in the format that is most useful for you, including CSV or other spatial data set file, spatial data formats. In terms of global solar and wind resource data, currently we do have wind and resource solar data for the entire globe, or all of the regions shown in this map. Wind data coming from the DTU and World Bank Global Wind Atlas, and solar data from the Global Solar Atlas from the World Bank and Solar GIS, covering all of the region. In the map, once we have a layer toggled on, we can also point query data throughout the map. So I can click on any location and find results for example, global solar. If I have multiple data layers on, I can go over to my legend to find out what those data layers are showing. So a quick legend I can organize, as in one of the big powerful tools of GIS is not just the analysis part, but the visualization, and allows us to layer or organize the layers that we're looking at on our map. So I can move these around just by toggling them up and down to see where land use intersects with different solar resources or protected areas or elevation. We can also query different data sets with the point query, which I showed, but also region or attribute query here. And I invite you to learn more by using the tutorials up at the top right. Lastly are a number of analysis and downloads. We have wind resource data downloads for the Philippines, which is actually an annual or time series data set for the Philippines wind resources. And you can box or point query that. And I invite you to learn more about those by clicking on those links. And then we also have a technical potential tool that allows you to determine the available resources. So generation potential, capacity, and potential land area, suitable land area for a type of technology, as well as the cost of energy mapping tool that runs a levelized cost of energy analysis with custom inputs from the user. So I'd like to demonstrate those real quickly. But by first, to introduce those, I know that this is my presentation, but I want to make this more involved from the audience. So I invite you to imagine, just for now, or put on that hat, that you are a developer in Southeast Asia and you're looking at Lao PDR, and you'd like to know what the technical potential for utility scale, fixed tilt, solar photovoltaics is in the country of Lao PDR. So you would like to know, what is the capacity? Where is that? Where are those really good resources? What is the generation potential there? And where could you start some of your pre-feasibility analyses? So by clicking on Technical Potential tool, we have a pop-up, and we can run an analysis here in this tab by selecting a country, such as Lao PDR. We can select a region, or we can do a national analysis by selecting all. We can select our wind or RE resource type, solar in this case, and fixed tilt as our technology type. And if you have any questions about any of these options, there's little popovers in these question marks that help you or guide you through using the tool. We can limit our resources by different resource categories. So if we want higher quality solar resources as a focus, we can put that in here. We can make assumptions about our power density of our solar PV system. We can limit by distance to certain roads if we'd like more accessibility. And then we can also exclude different areas for our technical potential. So we'll just exclude agricultural, forest, urban, and water here. And if we'd like to learn more at all, we can always toggle on the popover. We can save our layer and hit run analysis. And what this does is run through all of those screens and estimate our potential. So I've already done this in advance. It only takes a few seconds, but just in case this morning, if your analysis is successful, you'll get this nice pop-up, and you'll see some tabulated results here in your window. And this will show total generation for that area and those assumptions that you made, the total land area that's available given the exclusions that you identified for technical potential, and the estimated nameplate capacity for that system. And then some breakdown by resource type, and then breakdown by region. We can also close out of this results window and just here at the top see our analysis results. So this has also created a spatial data layer that we can actually download to our computer if we'd like to visualize this offline as well and use it with other data layers that we have in our own GIS tools. And we can zoom in and see our technical potential at different locations on a kilometer by kilometer grid resolution with our nameplate capacity, technical potential, resource class, and some description of that. So it allows us for our technical potential and can help with any sort of development projects or pre-feasibility to look at where you may focus in the future. So I know that I just had you imagine that you were a private developer in the region, but now I want you to maybe take that hat off and switch it for another one and pretend or imagine that you are a policymaker, or maybe you are a policymaker. I know we have a diverse audience joining us today. And you'd like to set some targets for RE development in your country. And the question that you have to solve, to help address this question of what is the acceptable RE targets in our country is more on the economic potential assessment. What's economically feasible? So what is the levelized cost of energy for onshore utility scale wind in Vietnam? So to help answer this question, we can jump to our analysis tools and run the cost of energy mapping tool. Opening that, we have a little window on methodology, so you can learn more about how the cost of energy mapping tool works, some of the assumptions and the methodology. And then we can click run analysis. And let's say we want this for Vietnam as a policymaker there, and we want to do a national scale assessment of levelized cost of energy. So I'm going to select all. We can select our currency, and since we have an international audience today, I'll put this in US dollars. And then we can select our resource type, which is wind. We can select from a preset number of technical potential scenarios. So we'll do a moderate scenario in terms of land areas that are excluded. If you'd like to learn more about these scenarios, you can just toggle over the question mark here. We have some preset assumptions here, which I won't change this morning, but these were gathered together with the ASEAN Center for Energy and country counterparts for more recent capital costs, fixed operation maintenance costs, and other assumptions for levelized cost of energy. However, you as a user can come through and edit any of these values if you'd like to represent your proprietary values or other assumptions or scenarios you'd like to run. So we can save this as an example for wind and hit run analysis. And again, I've run this ahead of time, much like a cooking show. And the analysis, once it's complete, will give you a nice green pop-up window showing success. And what we see here are results tabulated by region in Vietnam with the average LCOE for that region, which gives us an estimate of for each region in US dollars per megawatt hour. This could have also been run in local currency. If we close out of this box, we can see here that we now have results for LCOE on a kilometer by kilometer basis for all of Vietnam. And we have the analysis results layer at the top left in our layer tree. And we can learn more about that or download that data set, much like the previous data set, in a CSV or different spatial data set formats. We can also toggle on and off, or we can point query, specific locations if we'd like to learn more about what the cost of wind resources are at each location. We can go to our legend to see kind of what these colors represent on our map as well. And we can go back to our data layers and we can toggle this on together with other data sets here. So if we have our cost of energy shown, we can also overlay this with land use or protected areas if we'd like to see this in relationship to other potential development constraints or opportunities in the country.
Thanks,
Great.
Nathan. Are you about to wrap up?
Yep.
Perfect. I was just about to say, I want to make sure we have time for James and a robust question and answer session, but looks like we're on time for that now. So.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. So I invite you all to explore RE Data Explorer on your own. The link was provided. Coming soon, we are developing high spatial and temporal resolution data for all of Southeast Asia. So this will be 3 by 3 kilometer spatial resolution data that gives you a full year or 8,760 solar resource data to help with your energy modeling or planning analysis work. We'll be integrating PV watts, which helps you to estimate energy production of grid scale PV. Also, we will be rolling out a global coverage for RE Data Explorer for those that are maybe outside of Southeast Asia or countries currently represented. So thank you. Feel free to reach out with any questions. The link is here. Thanks for everybody for presenting, and thanks, Courtney, for the time check there.
Yes, thank you so much, Nathan. That was fascinating. And I have a whole list of questions that I'd love to ask, although I'm going to hold off on all of those and make sure we let the audience ask instead. But before we get to the Q&A, I want to finally turn things over to James Browning from Global Energy Monitor to talk about the suite of tools that they manage.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you so much, both for having the conference and for inviting someone from GEM in to talk about our mapping work. So I wanted to start with an overview of our global coal plant tracker, which began in 2008 as a project to track and map coal plants in the United States. At the time, there was a proposal from President Bush to build 151 new plants. And the idea was that the best way to understand the problems with these plants and ways to challenge them was to get more information about each of them. And this has grown over time into a data set and a map of every coal plant in the world, almost. There are still many industrial captive power plants that we don't have. And you can see them all mapped here. And what the tracker does on the End Coal website, it gives you the ability to filter these plants by operating, which you can see here, or you can add a layer of plants under construction. I know these are small, but you can see those in red. And then what you're able to do with each of these locations, for example, in Indonesia, this represents 6 units, and here you can see a unit, Kalbar 1, currently under construction. And our model is to have both a database with the numbers for all these plants, but then an individual wiki page, which gives more information about each plant. Here you see the map of the actual site, and then other information that our wiki editors have been contributing since this page was created. And I just want to dive in and show you, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this sort of work, but I just want to dive in and show you our model for doing this. GemWiki is open to anyone to contribute. We have many data categories where we need help. And so you can see here, this page was created in 2016, and a variety of editors have been working on it since then. And there's one of these for every plant that we have. What's also another really interesting feature about this is tracking retirements that have happened. You can see where those are happening around the world. Chile is a real success story in terms of successfully pressuring companies and the government to get plants retired. And so we take all this data and twice a year put out an update in a spreadsheet, which I'll just show you. This is going to be almost unintelligible in this format, but just to show you what it looks like for one country, for Indonesia, you can see that at the plant level, we're tracking the sponsor, the status, the wattage, And if you scroll over, an important feature of this is the location. I'll highlight this for you. So with the location of each project, obviously we try to get the exact coordinates of the existing projects, but when it's a proposed project and the location isn't certain yet, we just use an approximate location. And for those of you who work on Indonesia, every year there's a chance with the new national energy plan to determine exactly where some of these projects are. And we have some great partner groups in Indonesia who help us with this, although often reading the national energy plan, it's still not clear where they're going to be. And this is where getting ground truthing or getting help from people in the communities where these plants are going to be built is so helpful. Now I want to just show you, before I show you some more examples, I want to show you a really amazing artifact from trying to map energy projects. Now this is from 1955, so in the middle of the Cold War, and this is a declassified document from the CIA in which they were trying to locate energy projects in the Soviet Union for something called the Bombing Encyclopedia, which was an encyclopedia assessing the value of targets to be attacked in the event of a war. And so here you see they've found some information about a plant called Ulan Oud, a coal plant. And where did they get this? Well, as they say here, their only information, this is really amazing, was that a picture of it appeared in an oil painting. So here you've got first a copy of the image of the oil painting, and now a scan of it. And this is how information was being gathered about power projects. Now, I'm bringing this up because there's always been this tension of between transparency, the desire for transparency around energy projects, and the issue of national security. And I know many of you encounter the same challenge, but trying to get information out of governments or companies about energy projects, you run into this security argument or proprietary information. And this is where I think the mapping work is so important and transformative, because if anyone can find these projects and see them and see some of the impacts just through satellite views or ground truthing or other kinds of mapping, then there's no point in the government trying to hide them. And it continues to be a challenge as we start new projects mapping other kinds of fossil fuel infrastructure like pipelines and LNG terminals. And we've actually found in Japan in particular, it is very hard getting exact information about the capacity of different facilities out of companies or out of the government. And that makes it, of course, hard to study impacts both locally and globally. And so it is my own hope with a lot of this mapping work that we can push through a lot of these arguments that are preventing us from understanding everything from finances to the emissions and other impacts from these projects. So I want to show you some specific applications of some of the mapping work that we do. We focus a lot on China. You probably know since 2000, most of the new coal plant capacity in the world has come in China. It's more than 70% since 2000. And an interesting thing happened in 2016 and 2017, which is the government announced a halt or a slowdown to a lot of coal plants that were in the construction pipeline. They were concerned there was too much capacity. And what GEM did is, after this announcement, is to use satellite photography to look at some of these sites and see what was actually happening. And what we found is, out of 57 gigawatts of coal plants that were going to be halted or slowed down, that construction proceeded on 29 gigawatts, or about half of them, despite the official announcement. And the way we did this is just through a satellite photography service using the data we already had. So, for example, here's the Shangluo power plant, which here's June of 2017 when the halt was announced. And then over time, you can see over about 10 months, they've built most of the plant. Or, similarly, this is the Linyu waste coal plant. Same thing, mid-2017, the halt is announced, and you track it over time, and you see the construction is still going on. This is a really useful tool for holding the sponsor of these projects accountable if they're going to say one thing, and it is so easy to see what's actually happening on the ground. I'll give you another interesting example from Japan. GEM categorizes every project, whether it's a coal plant or a pipeline or something else, as in development or actual construction on the ground, or if it's not proceeding, eventually we categorize it as shelved or canceled. So here's an example. This was from last year, the proposed Yokosuka power station, where the company, the sponsor, said the construction was proceeding, but it's really a question. If you look at the ground, what's happening there, you can see the ground has actually been cleared, but there's no construction yet. Now, why is this so important? Unlike the example I gave in China, where there's an official claim that work has stopped, but the work is still proceeding, in many countries, it's the opposite dynamic. And we see this a lot in Indonesia, where the financiers, the government, others backing the project are eager to make it seem like it's on track. And there are a lot of official announcements that it's proceeding. But if you look on the ground, it's not. And this is very important for showing that the project can be stopped. I mean, it's very discouraging for activists working to stop a project to see nothing happening and then see these official announcements that it is happening. And so again, like the ground truthing, both from people who live near these projects and from the satellite view, is so important. I'm going to, in the last few minutes, talk about our newest project, the Global Fossil Infrastructure Tracker, but I just want to talk about a few more applications of this work and potential applications. One project in the United States where we collaborated with the NAACP was taking a map of existing coal plants and then using demographic data to show that far more coal plants were built in or near communities of color in the United States, and that many of these plants were the dirtiest that had been built or were being built. A new project we are talking about with some partner groups in the Western US and Canada is the crisis of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, which in the US and Canada is the huge underreporting of crimes, abductions, killings of Indigenous women and girls who live near fossil fuel projects. There's a strong correlation between this, and that this leads to incidents of violence against these communities. And so, it is easy to get the geographic data about where both the projects are and the workers are. And I think we're hoping it can be helpful to then correlate this with the acts of violence that are occurring in these communities. So I want to show you lastly our new project, which is it's the same model as the Global Coal Plant Tracker, and this is the Global Fossil Infrastructure Tracker, which is looking at LNG terminals, oil pipelines, gas pipelines, and we don't have a filter here yet for import and export terminals, But that's the direction we're going in. And in a couple of weeks, we're putting out a report talking about the boom in construction of export terminals in the US. And you can see in red here some of the ones that are under construction. And then the boom in construction of import terminals in Asia and some in Europe. And it's very much driven, as we see it, by the US and Canada trying to create markets for all of the fracked gas and to get these markets locked in into the future. And when you have a map of these projects, you can really see that these things are designed to last for 30 or 40 years, and they're being built now for a world that will no longer exist, that will no longer be so dependent on fossil fuels, and what we will then have really is a map of stranded assets around the globe. And so lastly, I'll just offer that we also have data sets. You can see in the bottom right here, it's LNG terminals, oil pipelines, gas pipelines. We have data sets for these as well in spreadsheet form, which are updated once or twice a year. And we are happy to share those. And I will stop now so we can take some questions.
Thank you, James. And thank you to the many folks who've already dropped questions into the chat box. I am going to go ahead and start working through those in the order in which they were asked. So please feel free to continue to add to the question and answer session. Any questions that we don't get to today, the panelists have all expressed interest in following up with people. So there's definitely an opportunity to continue the conversation. That said, I'm going to go ahead and get started with these. So our first question is about the opportunities to bring the various GIS mapping tools together. So with GIS tools becoming increasingly accessible and increasingly common, are there any efforts to bring GIS mapping together? For example, there are projects from the Asian Development Bank, which has done an integration mapping assessment of Myanmar, which is accessible online. Is there any pressure or discussion about creating a single platform for all of this information? Or I will expand on this, is there an opportunity to create partnerships between the many online mapping systems to create an ecosystem where people can access all of this similar but different data? And this is open to any of you.
I can start from NREL and then hand it to whoever else would like to discuss this. I think with NREL's and USAID's RE Data Explorer, we do try to coordinate with others that have overlapping functionalities or data sets whenever possible, to see if there is a way to coordinate our efforts. With our upcoming RE Data Explorer 2.0, it will be a global data set, and we do try to pull in data from other areas. For example, our wind and solar data and our land use data is often from other partners that we are coordinating with. And we always provide links so you can go and find that data. We also allow you to download the data. So, I think all of these tools make data available so you can download the data and aggregate it on your own machine to do your own analysis. And then there are efforts out there, and a colleague of mine is working towards kind of a standard format, an online database, just to search some of these open RE resource and complementary data sets. And I can share that if anybody wants to reach out.
In our look at fracking and gas extraction in the US, the collaboration that Jem is working on now is with a group called Frack Tracker, who has already done a lot of terrific mapping of fracking projects, which is incredibly complicated. I'm based in Pennsylvania, which was one of the first states to go through the fracking boom here. And we frankly still don't understand the impacts very well of the underground pollution, because in some cases the pollution gets into the aquifer, or in some cases the wells are cracking and leaking. And so, right now the challenge is mapping what's on the surface. So they do wonderful work. I recommend looking at them. Frac Tracker, we're looking at integrating the actual maps that they've already done where the projects are with other data sets.
Building on what they've said, our project is relatively new. We were just a little under a month since launch. So we haven't really had any formal partnerships going on right now, but we intend to. Actually, a lot of our data does come from GEM also, among others like AEI and CSIS. And we do always source it back to where we've gathered this information from. But we do intend to hopefully form partnerships that could be formal to an extent and create some kind of ecosystem that would better help these very similar but respectively very distinct programs.
Great, thank you. And I think Reagan, you've sort of touched on the next question somewhat briefly, but there was a question. Can you talk a little bit more about the amount of ground truthing that Stimson does for the data in the Mekong Infrastructure Tracker and the different ways that we can ground truth data?
Yeah, I guess for our project, it depends on what data layer we're talking about in terms of ground truthing. We have the infrastructure projects. In terms of ground truthing, we do expect, and we have gotten some information from those who live in the area and who have collected their own information. And when they do that, we do ask them to provide their own sources. In most cases, it might be a news article, it might be a personal experience that they've had themselves, in which case we take it with a grain of salt, but we do follow through with that information. And we kind of, we do try to corroborate it through means that we have here in DC. In this case, a lot of it has to do with remote sensing using satellite imagery and kind of verifying that information, like what James showed you earlier. But with other layers that are more geospatially, well, they're geospatial, ground truthing, it depends on the processes that the data creators used. In most cases, there is, to an extent, some ground truthing. For example, if we have a cropland data, they can ground truth it if they have enough local implementers to do so. But most times we do have to rely on remote sensing techniques to at least validate it to an extent, in which case that is noted. And we do take that in mind when we do upload those layers onto our programs.
Yeah, and I'll just add a very brief comment on that, which is that you'll see if you click on an individual project from the infrastructure data set, which is the portion that Stimson's team directly manages and pulled together, you'll see that every project has a data source listed, which is the original point of information. And most commonly, this is from a government website or an existing database that is reliable and trusted. From another organization that has been working on this for a long time. But beyond that, there is also a list of links with additional information. So almost everything in our database is publicly linked back to where it came from to one or more articles. So it should be easy to find for an individual project. You can see where the information came from. So the next question is an interesting one. I don't think it's one I've seen before, but I think it's very relevant to discuss given the proliferation of GIS technology. And it was asked specifically to Reagan, but I think it might be of use or of interest to our other panelists as well. One of our attendees raised the point that there are private sector companies which have collected similar information to the information that is portrayed in databases like these and tools like these, which is sold for a small subscription. So when we're looking at free tools like this, they're very interesting, but there is sort of a potential conflict with startup industries, which could be pushed out of business. So can any of you comment on the way that free tools and transparency of data interact or compete with ongoing developments in the GIS industry as it's taking off?
I'm not sure if Regan wants to address that first, but I'm happy to do it from RE Data Explorer. It's a really good question and a really important question. And I would say that RE Data Explorer was not developed to compete with private sector. I think we are taking the view of build a library and provide the books for the private sector. So historically, RE data and a lot of this complementary data was very expensive and sometimes inaccessible to the people who make decisions at the government level, or to smaller developers or other parties involved in planning or stakeholder-driven decision-making. So our theory is, instead of making one book that could be very expensive for a few, hopefully putting this data into a library that is accessible to all. So kind of making this a resource available for everyone out there. Secondly, I would note that we look at RED Explorer much like Google Maps. Google Maps started up and was freely available and had a lot of accessible data for everybody. And this also spurred private sector development. So many of the tools that we see out there here in the US, we use tools such as Waze, I know or Uber or Lyft, or other ride-sharing apps that are more present in like Grab in Southeast Asia, rely upon these free available spatial data sets online to develop their private sector tools. So we hope that by making this available, we're also making it more available for people who would like to start up their own tools or own companies. So supporting the private sector through these resources. So I think we don't want to compete with the private sector. We would like to share open data sets to support private sector development and make it accessible for all.
I'd say two quick things about that from the GEM perspective, and I don't want to generalize about all the private databases, but something like the Platts global database of power projects, I mean, it's very useful for us, but what distinguishes GEM is, we then spend, years combing through the same data to make sure it's accurate and updating it. And it is more accurate, far more than anything you're going to get out of that private source. And I mean, looking through the new Platts updates, there's probably a 10 to 20% error rate as old plants come up. And so, I think the two sets, are very complementary in that way.
Yeah, I can add to that. I think from our perspective, we've definitely haven't thought from that point of view, unfortunately. But we were thinking more of those who don't have access to this information. In specifics, specifically speaking, we're talking about those locally who are stakeholders to an extent, but who have been marginalized by the process itself, either through administratively speaking or through the entire process itself. So we go at it from that point of view, where we want to make these tools accessible and free to people who are interested in development in general in the region, but who don't have access to information that sometimes might be privately held.
Thank you. So I will answer the next question very briefly and succinctly. So someone had asked, are these presentations available for distribution afterwards? I can note that the recording of this session will be available on the Stimson Center event page that you went to RSVP for this event. So if you return to that page after the event within the next couple of days, the video link will go up there. And similarly, we've had one request to please share the link of the tool. So while the next question is being answered by panelists, I will drop the tool web links into, I'll make sure that those are also available on the web page moving forward. I don't think that I can chat them to everybody today since the chat function is turned off, but we'll make sure that the links are available for everyone who would like to follow up on the tools. So we have a specific question for Nathan on the Renewable Energy Data Explorer about methodology. So you pointed briefly to an area on the site where you could find information about the specific analytical tool, but can you talk more broadly? Is there information on methodology and technical tools available online on the website?
Great question. Thank you for that. Yes, we try to make sure that we have a very transparent methodology. So all the data sets, their sources, and the assumptions available there are available when visualizing the tool, so you can see all the metadata and what those data sets contain. In terms of the analysis tools, for the cost of energy mapping tool and these pop-up tools, they typically open up to a methodology tab, which briefly explains the methodology, but also points you to more technical reports and a user guide that describes how those tools actually assess technical potential, or for example, assess the cost of energy. So for the technical potential tool, the same, there's a user guide and resources there, as well as some example reports showing application of these sorts of analyses.
Thank you. So another question for Nathan. Great presentation. Though the attendee who asked this is not a GIS expert, they're trying to implement GIS-based tools for disaster impact assessment for large public infrastructure investment projects. So their question for you is, how long did it take to complete the development of your tool for the Data Explorer, and how long did it take to make that available for public use? And also whether or not there's any potential for nuclear energy plants to be included in your data set.
Great. RE Data Explorer was definitely started before my time at NREL, so I have to give kudos to all those that came before me. RE Data Explorer has gone through different forms until its current online platform. It at one point, I think, was more of a downloadable tool that you could put onto your computer and that we would have to travel with on CD to install on computers with data sets. And now it is an online tool, so it's taken some time. I was not involved in the technical setup of the tool, but if you'd like to reach out to me, whoever asked that question, feel free to reach out to me and I can put you in touch with the technical team to give you an idea of kind of what it takes. But it definitely takes, it's a multi-year, I would say, program and activity, and something that with these sorts of data sets, I think as James and Regan pointed out, data is always changing and it needs to be updated. So it's also not a static activity. So it's something that should be ongoing if you want to keep it relevant. In terms of nuclear data, we also on RE Data Explorer, I showed some of the RE resource data, but we also have some energy infrastructure data there, such as grid systems where it's available, such as transmission lines where provided, as well as we have a data layer from the World Resource Institute, which is their global power plant database that does show the location of thermal and renewable generation on the platform. So there is some nuclear or other resource data or generation data, but resource data, we typically focus on spatial resource requirements. So things like wind and solar that need to be utilized where they exist.
Thank you, Nathan. Our next question is broad, although I think given that the Mekong Infrastructure Tracker was just launched a couple weeks ago, we probably will not have a specific answer on this. But can any of the panelists share specific instances in Asia where these mapping applications or analytical tools involved in these applications prove particularly handy to either government decision makers or power project developers?
Well, I'll share a recent example. It's not explicitly about mapping, but it's more about the possibilities of combining the mapping with just some of the wiki updates, which is that beginning in March, we started tracking the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on different fossil fuel projects and whether they were causing construction delays or delays in reaching final investment decisions. And this is work that anyone could do. I mean, without training, really. And just by connecting the maps with some of those news reports, we helped generate a series of articles in Indonesia that I think it was 11 coal plants were in jeopardy of being either not built on time or in danger of becoming non-viable. And of course, the reason for this is even a delay of 6 months, a year, a little more, renewables are more and more competitive all the time. And so that's a huge delay for a dinosaur fossil fuel project. And so, I mean, something like that, there are opportunities like that all the time, where if you have the existing map sets and some of the wiki data, you can come in with a story that sort of ties disparate points on the map together.
Thanks, James. I'll answer just with two quick examples from Southeast Asia, recent examples that I've worked on. In the Lao PDR, we worked recently as part of Smart Infrastructure for the Mekong program from USAID to support the Ministry of Energy and Mines in a technical potential assessment for wind, solar, biomass, and other resources in the country. So using the data from RE Data Explorer and much of this spatial data analysis capability in RE Data Explorer to identify what wind and solar resources are there. And that assessment and associated cost of energy analysis supported other ongoing work conducted by other great colleagues, such as USAID Clean Power Asia, that is supporting them with an auction process. So identified some good solar resources from our analysis and these data sets, as well as a renewable energy zones planning process to help with their power development planning. NREL is also working with USAID and the Philippines Department of Energy to lead a renewable energy zones transmission planning process. So RE Data Explorer and the underlying data helped us to identify zones with really high quality RE resources that could be developed and are feasible and maybe cost effective to support proactive transmission planning in the country. And those zones are being assessed now to support the next transmission development plan by the Department of Energy.
Yeah, and I'll just add sort of a less specific and more general comment reflective of from the focus groups that our team did, since we held about 20 of them, many of them in the region with government, private sector, and research stakeholders in the room, about the value of providing some of this data open source. So one of the comments that we had from a number of government workers in various countries was that they often have very good access to more detailed data than our open source methodologies can provide on their specific data set for their specific ministry. But in thinking of cross-sector applications or cross-country data sets, they do not always have as easy access to information from a separate ministry. So if the energy ministry wanted information on water projects or on agricultural land or industrial zones, that may not be as easily immediately accessible to them in the level of quality that they need without having to go through a lot of different requests in order to access that data. So being able to provide even a slightly less detailed version of this data publicly allows them to specifically identify the type or specific project level data that they might need to ask and go to their colleagues with more specific questions. And in terms of energy specifically, I think it's also very helpful for planners in one country who are thinking within the context of energy trade to have some easily accessible information on energy projects and developments in neighboring countries, since that is potentially useful for them. And again, can be used as a starting point to move forward on specific discussions about specific projects. So that was one value of this open data set that we heard from a number of government officials in our focus group discussions. So for just a note for those who are interested in the discussion about innovation and private sector companies, there's a good discussion that's been put up in the chat box from a couple colleagues discussing similar data sets outside the region that we were talking about today. So there were a question about hydropower data in India. There was an answer about a specific company, Genesis Ray, which might have useful information outside the Southeast Asia zone that we were discussing today. And I would encourage people to follow that discussion. One question, another question on the sort of accuracy and correctness of data. When there is not an open source element to the data collection, how can we ensure that the data is correct? And that is an open question to everyone. I think there's been a little bit of talk of methodology already, but if anyone has additional comment, I would welcome that from any of the panelists.
Jump in real quick and just note that I think the question is kind of related to the type of data, and a lot of the global RE resource data and global data sets that we see are often modeled data sets. So I would point out the difference between that modeled data set and measured data or kind of ground collected data. A lot of the global model data definitely has to be validated at some point. So we want to make sure that we're sharing the highest quality RE or solar or wind resource data. So we definitely provide links to the sources of those so that you can go and see how they validated that data. This is not, for example, wind resource data that we share is not all collected from meteorological towers, for example, or solar radiation measurements on the ground. A lot of it is modeled because it is global. It's a very large extent, but we do try to find sources that are reputable and have validated that data to a large extent, or we develop it on our own. We do try to validate local data where possible. So a lot of the data in RE Data Explorer, when we have demand or we're working in country, is collected from country counterparts. For example, in the Philippines, the National Agency for Mapping, so NEMRIA, would be our source for data, and we would look at their kind of metadata and how they validated their data. So we work to find local partners to collect data as well.
For GEM, one of our solutions to this issue is in the nature of the wiki pages. I mean, we publish updates and put out maps that, you know, are as accurate as we can make them every 6 months or every year, depending on the sector. But then the wiki pages acknowledge the existence of ambiguity in some cases. And if there are differing reports about a project or its impact, we try to get both sides of it. And, you know, this is facilitated by the open source model where different people can contribute, whether it's ground truthing from someone who lives right by the project or someone who's using the 30,000 foot satellite view.
We always kind of start the process with whatever's available to us when, you know, we do a quick internet search, and it's usually starting at, you know, a media report, but we always build up from there. We always look for the sources when possible. We look for these names that are involved in terms of who the stakeholders are. And in most cases, or in some cases actually, we'll get lucky and we'll find documentation from foreign companies that have made an announcement, or we'll even get documentation from the governments themselves that provide these documentations publicly. And we kind of corroborate each of them. And we cross the dots and but we do try to make sure we can find some kind of validity to whatever documents we have and the variables or data points that we do get from them.
Well, thank you. And I think we're about at the end of our session today. So I don't want to take up too much time, particularly since I know many of our attendees are coming from Asia and it's getting quite late there. But thank you everyone for joining us. We have a number of questions that we did not get to today. For those who are interested in continuing this conversation, we have access to these questions after the session ends. So I'm going to now open up the poll that I mentioned before. And if you are interested in following up with any of the participants today or any of the teams working on these tools, I would encourage you to please go ahead and vote. And if you click yes on any of those individual tools, then we'll make sure that we share that list as well as the follow-up questions and the information for those who asked them with all of our panelists here today so that the conversation can continue after today's event ends. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Our team is very excited to continue engagement on the Mekong Infrastructure Tracker, and I know that NREL and Global Energy Monitor are both active publicly in sharing these tools and continuing to develop them into the future. So I think that there's a lot of great conversation that can continue after today's event. And I hope that everyone who's attending from ASEF has gained a lot out of not only this session, but the many exciting sessions and discussions that were part of ASEF this year. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And I hope that we'll have the opportunity to follow up with many of you in coming days. So with that, yes, thank you all. So with that, I'm going to officially close the event. I'm going to leave the event going for a couple of minutes just so that all of those votes can come in and we can make sure we follow up with everybody who's interested in receiving follow-up.
Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you for joining us, Nathan.
Yep. Forward to questions and following up.
Yep, we'll be in touch very soon. All right, thank you everyone for joining. I think all of the answers have come in for the poll, so I'm going to go ahead and end this session. We look forward to continuing the conversation afterwards. Thanks.